The content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belong to the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views of Brigham Young University or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Well, I'm delighted to be here with you today, the beginning of another wonderful education week. How many of you have been in one of my classes before? Any of you? All right, well, welcome back. And for those of you for whom this is the first experience, I'm grateful to be here with you. So this is a schedule for me for the week. Today, we're going to talk about how you stop bad habits and start new ones, good ones. Tuesday, we'll talk about crucial conversations, as well as on Wednesday. Thursday, we'll talk about helping those struggling with addiction. And Friday, a topic I call, Are We Losing? Principles for Hope of Imperfect Families. That probably only applies to 10% of you. So glad to be here with you. Question usually comes up, are there texts that I've authored that are related to these topics? The one in the middle there is the one that's relevant for today's topic. Should be available in the bookstore. Change Anything, The New Science of Personal Success. So my name is Joseph Grenny, and my background is social science. So my field basically just asks two questions. And to me, they're the most important questions in the world. The two questions we're most interested in are, why are you doing what you're doing now? And then secondly, how can you help people change? That's social science. Why are we doing this? And how could I help somebody do that? And that somebody might be myself. Well, one of the marvels of social science for me is that oftentimes the greatest mystery in life is why I behave the way I do. We're often black boxes to ourselves. And so what I want to share with you today is some thoughtful ways of answering those two questions. And you're going to need a couple things for the journey. First, you're going to need something to write on and something to write with. You're usually well equipped with that. Second thing you're going to need is a learning buddy. So look to your left and right and decide who is smarter. And you might want to buddy up with them. We'll advance your own education, but grab a buddy. If you're seated alone, move a little bit. Make sure you got somebody you can work with. Everybody got a buddy? All right. Yeah, there you go. Brave people relocating so that you can amplify your learning opportunity. Terrific. Okay, point at your learning buddy. Who's got whom? Okay, this is not an eternal relationship. It's a temporary one. So decide what you want when you're done. So here's the question for today. We like to use the word agency, I think, in the church. And I want us to think about it a little bit more carefully than we sometimes do. The question that Father Lehi asks is, which of two things are you? The ones that act or the ones that are acted upon? And far more often, we're unwilling or unable to acknowledge we're being acted upon. And that's one of the big messages for today. So years ago, my son, as part of a science fair project, went to a mall on a busy holiday weekend when blockbuster movies were out and decided to try a little experiment. He wanted to see how self-aware people were about how they would behave if something happened that they didn't like. The something that was going to happen was someone was going to cut in line in front of them in the movie. And so the movie's going to sell out. It's likely you're not going to get a ticket. Somebody cuts in front of you. What are you going to do? Prior to his little experiment, the intervention, he asked 25 different people, what would you do if somebody cut in line in front of you? And about 2/3 said something to the effect of, well, I'd let them know, that's not okay. You can't just cut in line in front of me. That's what people predicted they would do. And then he did the actual experiment. Welcome to Utah. But it isn't just Utah, it's all of us. Do you catch the point? Out of 25 people, most of us thought, well, I would say something, right? If somebody violates a boundary, I would do something. And then when we're in the actual moment, our behavior hardly resembles our prediction. And that's the big idea. So think, how many of you, and don't raise your hand on this, but have what I would call a change problem. This is a situation where I know I should change. It's costing me a lot. It's hurting my life. It's damaging relationships. Something I'm doing isn't working. And I want to change. I sincerely do, but then I don't. So most of us have multiple areas of our lives where we know we could be doing better, right? How I show up for my calling, how I'm in a relationship, how I manage my money. I know I should change. I even want to change, but then I don't. I know I should speak up when somebody cuts in line, but then in that moment, I don't. And so the question for all of us is, why? Why do we do that? Why do we do that? And that's what I want you to have a higher quality answer to today. Our tendency far too often is to go to shame and to say it's because I'm not a decent human being. And that not only is incorrect, it's incredibly unhelpful. So I want to give you a little illustration of the conundrum that we're facing here. This is a group of some of my dearest friends in the world. On the top, they live in Denver. On the bottom, they live in Salt Lake City. This is a place called the Other Side Academy. You're going to want to write that name down. Any of you who have a loved one or friend who has a long history of crime, addiction, or homelessness, this is a terrific resource to be aware of. My wife and I volunteer there regularly. And these have become some of the people I love most in the world. They stay for 2.5 years and do harder work to try to change the trajectory of their future than most any of us will ever have to do. The Other Side Academy. So when we started there about 8 years ago, I met this guy. I'm going to call him Peter. Peter was facing a 20-year prison sentence. 20 years. And the courts, in their wisdom, said, if you go to the Other Side Academy and stay for 2.5 years, we'll forgive you of that 20-year sentence. Pretty good deal, eh? And you'd think the math would be enough to get somebody to stay, but that's not how we as human beings work. And so Peter was doing really great. He'd volunteer for things. He worked on the Other Side Academy's moving company, was a really hard worker, took great care of customers. He volunteered when we went to a food pantry. He was the first to say, I'll take my Sunday when I could take a nap and go help hand out food to people that are in need. But then one day, Peter made a bad decision. He broke a rule in the house. I mean, nothing that you'd write home about, but he did something he shouldn't have. Maybe he stole a pair of socks, right? Or maybe he took a cookie he wasn't entitled to. And so his option was to sit on the bench at the Other Side Academy. He was told, sit down there, think about the other stuff that you need to clean up in your life, and then we'll talk about what the consequences are. He might have had to do a few hours of community service, clean some dishes and things like that, and that was his option. It was either do the dishes, do the extra hours, the community service, and then work your way through to the house, or it's go to prison for 20 years. He went to prison. He walked out. He was so angry, so frustrated, and don't gasp too hard because you and I have done the same thing, right? In impulsive moments where emotions are strong, we've made decisions that were long-term really bad, but short-term felt terrific, right? And that's what he got, was about 60 seconds of ego satisfaction for 20 years in prison. And that's us as human beings. Now, that's Peter's story, but can you even predict your own? Why would a former missionary leave the church? And you know that there were moments where that missionary probably had such a conviction about the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ that they would have said, there's no way I would ever doubt, right? We've all had those moments of certainty. Why would a worthy member violate the law of chastity? Why would a young adult with great potential develop a drug addiction? How could a good priesthood holder or sister develop a pornography addiction? There are moments when that would seem impossible, unlikely. But then there are other moments where it seems overwhelming and daunting to not do that. Why would you say something hurtful to a child or spouse? Why would you procrastinate important tasks? Why would you eat, or use social media? You get the idea here? All of us have our own little demons, and we tend to misunderstand why we do what we do. Why would you behave in ways that you don't want and suffer consequences you don't like? So here are the basic ideas. First thing with your partner. I want to share with you the problem we're trying to solve. I'm going to give you 3 concepts. I want you to memorize them and then pass them off to your partner. And partners, don't let them off easy. Make sure they know what they are. Okay, so here we are. Let's read them together as they come up. First, we're not good. This is the audience participation time. Okay, here we go. All together. We're not good at predicting our own behavior because we don't understand why we do what we do, so we're not very good at changing our own bad habits. Okay, so memorize them, pass them off. You got 90 seconds, go. 20 seconds left, 20 seconds. Your future depends on this. Okay, that's it. So let's do it together. So what's the first idea? Oh, beautiful, like the Tabernacle Choir. Because? So if we want number 3 to change, if we want to get better at changing bad habits or starting good ones, we need to get better at predicting our behavior by better understanding why we do what we do. So let me give you a quick illustration of this. Years ago, we did a little experiment where we got 80 kids together on a Saturday. And these kids were 11 and 12-year-olds. We wanted them old enough that they could make some good judgments, think longer term, delay gratification, things like that. 11 and 12-year-old kids. We said, over the next 10 minutes, we're going to give you a chance to earn $40. Decent, right? All you're going to have to do is complete 4 simple tasks. After each task, you get $10. Is that a decent hourly wage? Okay. So our goal as a social science experiment was just to get money into their hands, and then we wanted to see how they would make judgments and decisions. That was the purpose of it. And so as we were going to put money in their hands, we wanted them to kind of anchor in some intention so they could resist whatever temptations we'd offer them. So we asked them, what are you going to do with the money once you got it? So all of them, $40, who wouldn't know what they wanted to do with that, right? And then all we did was after each task, when they got the additional $10, we would walk them over to a table and say, do you want to buy something? Now, I want you to look carefully at the table. What do you notice? Yeah, are the prices good or bad? These are horrible, right? So you've got Laffy Taffy over here, like one little chunk of Laffy Taffy for $2, right? Snickers bars for $6, $8 for some Sour Patches. Now, let me ask you carefully this question. Do kids know the price of candy? Oh, yes, they do. This is their market, right? You may know when the Nordstrom half-yearly sale is. They know the price of Sour Patch Kids. They know how much they are at Target. They know Maverick. They know all of that. And so they know this is a bad deal. These are like 4 to 6 times higher than what they ought to pay. And how long do they have to wait to finish the experiment? 10 minutes. 10 minutes, and then they're done. They can go down to the Maverick and get 5 times as much candy for the same amount of money. So what do? Now, parents were watching on closed-circuit television in horror, right? This is my child's future being predicted in this moment. They spent like drunken sailors. Now, the question is, why? Why? So we looked at the tally of this. They could have walked out with how much money? $40. The average kid walked out with $13. Some were in debt to us by the time they finished. And trust me, we're making them pay it off. They're still working on this. So we asked them, why did you do this? The wisest of the group. What happened to me, right? So turn to your partner, just off the top of your head, why did they do this? First answer that you come up with, go. All right. Now, I want that top of the head answer because that frame that you just used, the model of human behavior that you just employed to answer that question is the same one you tend to apply to yourself. Most of us, if I were to take the 500 people or so in the room and write down all our answers, the vast majority of us would say something like that. It was just impulsive, right? They didn't want to delay gratification. They liked the candy. They wanted the taste. Listen to the answers. Most of these come down to, I was weak. It's a shame-based model of human behavior. And when we apply that to ourselves, we undermine our capacity to change. It's not only wrong, it's dangerous. But let's just focus for today on it's wrong. When people behave in particular ways, it's a much bigger picture. So let me just pull back the lens. We, of course, as social scientists, we're trying to set up an environment that might induce that kind of behavior. And we did it this way. So here's the model I want you to remember from today forward. Imagine that this is like window panes, right? You're looking through a 6-pane window. And the problem is you and I tend to only look through the upper left-hand one, what we call the personal motivation window. The reason they did that is because they wanted it. They wanted the candy. They wanted the flavor. They wanted the immediate gratification, the personal motivation one. When we give in to something that's a difficult temptation for us, our tendency is to only look through that window. How many more windows are there? There's 5 more. There's 6. There's 6 categories of influence that shape our behavior. And to the degree you and I start to look through all of them, we have a more godly view of one another. After today, I hope you read the scriptures differently than you ever did before. If you look at how our Father in heaven and our Savior try to influence the behavior of people through the scriptures, you'll find they employ all of these sources of influence. They do it all the time. It's rare they come down and say, knock it off, you weakling. That hardly ever happens in the scriptures. They tend to do many, many different things. So here's what we did. As good social scientists, we wanted to try to come up with a manipulation in each of these categories. The upper left-hand box, we wanted to put the kids into an impulsive mode. So just like a good drug dealer would do, when they walked into the room, we took them over to the table and we said, do you see a candy there that you like? And of course, all of them would say, yeah, that one. And we'd open it up and we'd give you a little taste, right? We wanted them what psychologists call a hot mode. Second, we were manipulating them from an ability perspective. They'd never been in this setting before. They had no skills. They weren't prepared for how they were going to deal with some of what they were going to face. They had no training. Next, you'll notice we'll move to these center blocks. These are the social blocks. This wasn't just an isolated experience. This was a social experience. And what we did was we got a girl in a purple sweater and a guy in a red shirt to sidle up next to the subject and to deliver a line when they were making their decisions. Would that influence us? Oh, yeah. Does it only influence 11 and 12-year-olds? No, it's all of us. Now, a total stranger telling me to do something absolutely stupid, right? Would it affect me? It does all the time. It's called television, right? And YouTube, and we're influenced by it constantly. Finally, we influence them from a structural perspective. We paid them not in cash, but in a credit account. And we told them at the end we'd tally everything up. Do you spend more money when you're using a credit card or cash? Yeah, because it separates you from the consequence of the decision. And finally, we influenced the physical environment they were in. We were putting them in a room that was festooned with pictures of candy and kids eating candy and kids staring at candy and candy being stretched apart and all sorts of wonderful things. And you saw what happened. So here's the big idea. If you would just stand for a moment, if that's not uncomfortable for you, just stand up. I need you to take a pledge. I need you to take a pledge. So take your right hand and place it over your heart. This is the one big idea I hope you carry with you because everything else attaches to it. Let's repeat the statement up there. It says, I can only control my behavior by, all right, one more time. I can only, all right, sit down. Now, the problem is that one of those words is offensive to us. We hate the word control me. Our belief in agency is this naive suspicion that if I'm a strong enough human being, then the world will not affect me. We wouldn't have needed a flood in the Bible if that were true. God would have just said, figure it out. But every once in a while, he resets the deck because he knows it's possible for sources of influence to be so overwhelming that agency is almost non-existent. And so you and I need to take that same lesson. The only way you can control your behavior is to do what? Yeah, it's to order your environment. It's to choose the things that you're going to allow to influence you. They will influence you one way or another, and that's what I want to convince you of. So let's define agency as the power to control our own behavior. And of course, we have this wonderful sermon from Father Lehi where he says there are things that act and things that are acted upon. The truth is we are always the second one. We are always acted upon. You don't get to vote on that. The only question is, will you act on the things that act on you? That's what you get to do. If you want to control your behavior, you don't do it directly, you do it indirectly. You say, where am I headed and what sources of influence will I bring into my life to help me get to where I want to go? It's kind of like this. This is life. The last 100 years of social science just says that. It says you're on the left, you're this hapless person that wishes that they could kind of move backward, but there are all of these 6 different forces pulling against you. And the problem is you're blind to them. So you just think the lack of movement is your weakness. It's your lack of moral commitment. That may be a piece of it, but it's only a piece. What we're hoping that you do is learn the lesson both from the scriptures, but also what social science, I think, illuminates about the scriptures to say, this is what you ought to do. Recruit those. Get them on your side of the rope. Because when you do, change becomes inevitable, becomes the path of least resistance. And that's our goal. So that's what we're after. This is it. That's the big idea. In the remainder of the time, I'm going to hit you really fast with a lot of things, and don't worry if you don't capture each and every element. All I want to do is persuade you of 2 things. Number one, that every one of these sources of influence is profoundly influential in our lives. And number 2, they're incredibly plastic. It's possible for you to reshape them and to bring them onto your side of the problem in your life. That's what I want you to believe. And that's the evidence of the last 100 years of social science. So here they are. Notice that what this suggests is when I behave a particular way, it's for 2 reasons. So look at the 2 columns there. The left side says what? Motivation. The right side says? Yeah. It's suggesting that when Joseph goes and buys something for 10 times more than he could have if he waited 10 minutes, he's doing it because he wants to and because he can. Make sense? That's the world. Now, if you just get that into your head, it will double your influence. Because most of us live in that left column. We think all problems are motivation problems. They're all about motivation. If somebody tried hard enough, you wanted to get off porn, if you wanted to get off drugs, if you wanted to control your spending, you would just do it, right? You just do it. Well, that's not true. That's not how the world works. There's motivation and there's ability. And if you try to motivate people that lack ability, you don't create change, you create depression. Our goal is just to illuminate all these other elements. Next, you'll notice that there are 3 ribs on the model: personal, social, and structural. So these are the 3 different elements that affect whether we want to and whether we can. The personal is the stuff inside of Joseph. So what inside of Joseph makes him want to do that and makes him able to do that, right? But the next ones look at who? Not Joseph, but who? Everybody around you. And you and I are so naive about the degree to which the people around us shape whether we want to and whether we can. It's huge. They're the people in the large and spacious building. And the only way that you can not have them affect you is to not look. It's to cut them off. It's to have them out of your life. Finally, there's the non-human elements, the structural things. It's the physical world and the economies that we live in that affect our motivation and our ability. So again, my goal is just to illustrate how potent each of these are and how plastic they are. So let's look at the first. The first is what we call the personal motivation influence. And this is the one that creates this conundrum for us. We live in a world where oftentimes the bad stuff feels good and the good stuff feels bad, right? Because if the good stuff felt good, we just do the good stuff all the time. But if the bad stuff feels good, then we start feeling this temptation to move that direction. But brothers and sisters, I want to testify of one thing. The bad stuff does not feel good and the good stuff does not feel bad. Human beings are way more complicated than that. It isn't about the thing that we're trying to do. Buying candy for 5 times its value doesn't feel good. It only feels good under certain conditions. Watching porn does not feel good. It just feels good under certain conditions. And if you and I know how to manipulate those conditions, we can make the good stuff feel good and the bad stuff feel bad. Let me illustrate. So, the argument I want to make is that you and I, our feelings and our motivations about what we're tempted to do is not about the thing itself, it's about how we frame the thing that we're doing. So here's the illustration. Years ago, we did an experiment in Halloween. And so we set up a porch that had 2 bowls on it, and kids were invited to go up one at a time to the porch. The left bowl had bags of apple slices in it, right? The right bowl, this is the house that gets tomatoed, right? That gets rocks thrown at it afterwards. So the left one had apple slices. The right one had traditional Halloween treats, chocolatey and sugary kinds of things. So in the first sort of control condition, we let kids come up and unguided, we wanted to see which they would take. What would you predict? So over the course of an hour, we refilled the right-hand bowl 3 times. The left-hand bowl stayed pretty much as you see. Sherlock was the only one that lifted the apples. So that was the control condition. Now, the question that I put to you is, why do we do what we do? Why would we take the candy? And if you're a naive social scientist, if you're not well informed, what you'll say is because candy is yummier, because candy is more delicious. No, that's not why we take it. We take it because we arrived on the porch with a frame. And that frame made us feel a certain way about our decisions. Does that make sense? We arrived with a Halloween frame. The Halloween frame, and you don't even realize the frames that are affecting your decisions, but they're there. The Halloween frame says, what would I like to eat, right? What do I want to eat? Now, we wanted to test whether this theory of framing was correct by trying an experimental condition. This time, the kids were going to approach the same porch, but now there's a sign hovering above the bowls. Now, I know since then I've repented of all of the body shaming stuff that's embedded in this, and I sincerely do. There's a bad message in this that I don't want to make light of. And if I had it to do over again, I would do this differently, and it could be done differently, but pay attention to the message. So what are we suggesting here? Rather than what do I want to eat, the frame could be what? Who do I want to be, right? Who do I want to be? So it's a potential aspirational frame. Now, just putting a picture there, could that affect somebody's decision? I mean, these kids aren't being guilt-tripped or anything, so here's what happens next. Watch. Watch him, little guy. Almost. Got close. Look at the hand. Can you see the shift when the shift happens? Look at this. Look at her. And then boom. Watch this one. I like, whee! It's like a 10-second delay here. Did you hear it? He wanted apples. They wanted apples. So what they wanted changed. Why? What changed? The frame. So when I have an aspirational frame, I feel differently about the decision. So please, brothers and sisters, never despair that something is so overwhelmingly tempting that there's no way I could ever resist it. That's just not true. You can only not resist it if the frame you've got is making it appealing to you. Does that make sense? And so always assume when you're struggling with temptation that there's a frame that sits underneath that. Learn to articulate that and challenge that frame. So let me give you an illustration. Dear friend struggling with a pornography addiction. And I tried to teach him this principle. And he says, it's just so hard. I'm sitting there and it's nighttime and I'm lonely and this happens. And I start thinking about this and I remember these 3 experiences and then I'm on the internet. And I said, all right, well, let's talk about framing. What kind of a frame would you have to give yourself to feel good about using pornography? And his eyes opened kind of big. And then he started thinking about it. And I want you to play with that same question because you have to have a frame, right? The frame is, I deserve to feel good, right? Or I've been doing well for so long. Or we come up with some other frame that makes this decision okay. And you get to do that. But the problem is we don't realize we're doing it. And so then I said, all right, is there a frame that would jar you loose of that would change how you felt? Because I said, right now while we're talking, do you want to use porn? And he goes, no. And I said, okay, so apparently it's not so overwhelming that you just can't not do it, right? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, so what frame do you have right now? Well, it would be embarrassing, and I don't want to be embarrassed. Okay, good. Well, that's a frame that got you to feel differently about it. What frame could you use at 11 o'clock at night when you're having those temptations? He went back to his patriarchal blessing, and he came up with this. Let's see. He extracted this from his patriarchal blessing. I am a servant of my heavenly Father, engaged in fulfilling the mighty foreordination given me in the pre-existence, to save the souls of men and to prepare the way for the second coming of Jesus Christ. If you read that, could you use porn? He couldn't. Those are his words. The words have to matter to you, not to him. But he said in that moment when he took a breath, when he felt that, when he prayerfully asked for that frame to settle upon him, he didn't have the temptation. Now it's a struggle to retain the frame because these are ephemeral and we have to work to try to move that. But what I want you to see is just how compelling those frames are and how plastic they are as well. You're acted upon. We are not acting, but we are being acted upon when we begin rehearsing an unconscious or satanic frame of mind in what we're doing. That's when it becomes overwhelming. There is a frame that we carry into these moments and they determine how we feel about what we're doing. So you change the frame, you change the feeling. Now, again, my goal is not for us to have massive competence in frame changing yet. I just want you to put a bookmark in that and realize that's something to pursue. That's a skill. That's a way of taking control of the things that control us. Next, let's move over to the ability side. The ability side says, gosh, if I'm trying to overcome a difficult habit, there are skill issues potentially as well. And you and I almost never consider these. New habits almost always require new skills. Think about that picture of those people at the Other Side Academy. And think about how the average student in those pictures has been arrested 25 times. They've lived on the streets for decades sometimes, longtime heroin and meth addicts and criminals, and they've been breaking into your homes and stealing your identity. They have an enormous skill set that you don't. But what they don't have is the skill set for living your life. And what we tend to do is to say, let's incarcerate them until they change. Well, guess what skills they're acquiring while they're at the point of the mountain? A whole lot more of those skills. And what skills they're not acquiring is the skills you have to live your life. I remember when one of our graduates got his first job in his entire life, 45 years old, very first job, brings home his first paycheck. And I sat next to him on the couch and he opened the paycheck out and it was like $720 or something like that. And he looked at it and he goes, what the? And then some other word. And I said, was that happiness or was that fury? And he said, it was fury. And he said, this isn't how much I earned. And I said, how much did you earn? He told me the number. And then I said, let me explain taxes to you. The thing I've been paying and you haven't for the last 45 years. And he goes, oh, there's this whole world he had no idea about. But you and I think if he's motivated enough, he'll change. No, he needs a lot of ability as well. So real quick, I need your help. This is me. So last week I was on travel. I for the evening was in a hotel room. My doctor tells me if I eat 2,000 calories a day, I have the potential of living a long and healthy life. But that particular day, I ate 5,286 calories, ended up passed out on the floor of my hotel room with an inverted tub of Ben and Jerry's on my face. And it was a wonderful day. So my question to you is, why did I do that? So turn to your partner. First answer off the top of your head. Why did Joseph do this? Go. Okay, now remember the windows, right? The left side of the model says what? Motivation, the right side says what? Ability. So I want you to think to yourself, raise your hand if the answer you just gave to your partner was some version of perhaps Joseph lacks some skills. Raise it up, raise it up. So look around the room and count with me. How many of us went to the right side of the model? Like 6, right? About 6 of us. We don't think about ability. And there are huge ability issues at play here. Our knowledge of what's right to eat, our knowledge of being able to intervene to affect our own emotions, all sorts of competencies and skills that make a difference. And this is our problem in the church. Our central change belief is that there is no problem that can't be solved by a good sacrament meeting talk. The belief underneath that is that motivation is what creates change. No, that's a piece of it. It's an important piece, but it's only a piece. God understands differently than that. Because oftentimes our interventions produce this, not change. So think about it for a second. If I'm struggling with some sort of a difficult to overcome habit, what kind of skills do I acquire over time in moving into that habit? What sort of competencies in finding out the dark places, or in avoiding being caught, or in learning to stimulate myself even more using that method? And there are competencies, there are skills that happen. So what skills do you need to maintain a porn addiction? There are many of them. There are different skills you need to overcome a porn addiction. Can you become skilled at immorality? Oh yeah, you can. At cheating and lying and sneaking and connecting and all these other sorts of things. What skills do you need to lie? How many of you think you're good liars? How many by not raising your hand are lying? Yeah. There are competency skills for how you maintain the facial expression, what kind of message you deliver. And little by little, we learn to manipulate and deceive. And there are skills for this, skills for school cheating. But the problem is that while Satan's goal is to make us skilled at sin, what you and I tend never to do when people are trying to overcome our weaknesses is help them with the skills they need to overcome them. We do a lot on motivation, very little on ability. Elder Robbins said it nicely this way: it's easier to avoid temptation than it is to resist it. Why? Because when you don't avoid it, when you immerse in it, you start acquiring competencies with it. You acquire skills. Elder Packer said, never make the same mistake once. Now, the problem is we all have. We've crossed that line. And we've started to become competent at some of the weaknesses that we have. If it's bad spending habits, we're probably very competent at our favorite shopping sites and internet sites, and we have patterns and routines for doing that. But we don't have the complementary skills that help us move a different direction. I did this study after we published the Change Anything book. And I thought, all right, I think I've tried to do justice to the social science, but now I want to put the gospel lens on. So I went to the scriptures, and you know what? The scriptures really are an influence history. It's God taking a special interest in some certain people's lives, and then we get this extended narrative of how God influenced them. Whether it's Adam and Eve, or Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, or Lehi and Nephi, you get these extended stories, and you see, how does God help Joseph Smith become Joseph Smith? He intervened, and there are many sources of influence. All of these, there are 42 extended cases I was able to find in all of the standard works. Lehi, Nephi, Laman, Lemuel, you name it. And watch what he does. He influences Joseph, the son of Jacob, by sending him to prison. Why? To acquire some skills. Is that right? And he has to spend a while there. He has Joseph Smith spend 10 years between 1820 and 1830, first vision and the restoration of the church. 10 years. Why? Because dude needed to acquire some skills. He needed to learn how to connect with God and receive revelation and influence people before he was going to administer a growing organization. Brigham got to watch Joseph Smith. This is not coincidence, and you know it. He got to watch Joseph Smith lead Zion's camp almost the exact same length of a pilgrimage as he was then going to have to lead later. God invests in skill building. Jesus mentored the disciples for 3 years before he then delegates leadership of the church to the first presidency and the quorum of the 12. And Jesus himself discloses to us, I do nothing of myself, but as my Father hath taught me. He came to acquire skills as well. Habits develop skills, and the longer you stay in the habit, the more you acquire a certain amount. What I hope this just reinforces to us is the need to invest in that other side. Let me show you what it looks like. What it doesn't look like is most of our Sunday school and gospel doctrine and priesthood and Relief Society lessons, which are motivational speeches. We need to get better at sharing ability. We can use our Relief Society and Elders Quorum and young men and young women's time to start teaching skills that people need to manage their life. And so here's how you do it. This is Zia Terry. She's 10 years old when this picture was taken. Her goal is to one day become an Olympic ski jumper. So her mom signs her up for a class. She goes to this workshop in Park City where she's going to work with Olympic ski jumpers and get tutored in how to do this. So how do they do it? How do you help somebody become an Olympic ski jumper? You have them go down hills, right? So day one, she goes down a 20-meter ramp. Woo! Really exciting. The second day, she goes to the top of a 40-meter ramp. And her mom straps a GoPro camera to her head so she can remember this someday. And here's what happens next. And that's the 60 the next day. Isn't that incredible? What a transformation from timid and scared and nervous and to, right? And that's what it feels like when you acquire skill. But here's how you impart skill. You don't do it with a motivational speech. What you do is you create real conditions where people can practice something. Second, you have them practice at the edge of their ability, not some boring, easy, non-stimulated state. Third, you teach them a specific skill. You say, try this. Don't worry about your poles. Just go straight down the hill. Don't snowplow. That's all I want you to focus on. You don't overwhelm people with a list of 10 things. You do one until you've owned that one. And finally, you get immediate coaching and feedback. And we stink at this in the church. We stink at giving feedback. When you're mentoring some young person that's going ministering with you for the first time, and they've given their first lesson, and they're feeling all nervous and aren't sure if that went particularly well, it's our job to sit down with them afterwards and give them some immediate coaching and feedback. We don't do that with our brothers and sisters. We don't help people struggling in marriages because we don't want to offend. They need skills. They need what we have to offer them. We can do much better. So the principle here is this: if it takes too much willpower, it's probably a skill problem. There are probably competencies that we lack. You getting the idea? You don't control your behavior directly. You do it by taking control of the things that control you. If the frame is controlling you, learn to articulate and change that. If competency problems are an issue, start to work on how can I acquire competency. But now let's work on the social side. So this is AJ. She was trying to overcome a long-time 2-pack-a-day smoking habit. And ironically, she was a respiratory therapist, right? So she's working in hospitals trying to help people with pulmonary problems. One day there's an emergency call on the 5th floor of the hospital. She's on the 1st. Protocol is responding to the emergency. You don't use the elevator. It could slow you down. You hit the stairs. She makes it up 2 flights of stairs and is gasping and can't make it. And that was her moment. She said, I got to deal with this. So she started looking at the things that control her in her life, and look what she learned. So if she wants to stop smoking, what does she need to change? Yeah, if she's in environments where it becomes normal and reinforced to smoke, then she's going to continue to smoke. So the principle here is this: you've got to try to identify who are the accomplices in my life and who are the friends. The difference between a friend and accomplice is an accomplice helps you get into trouble and a friend helps you. And if there are people that are modeling bad behavior, enabling bad behavior, supporting bad behavior, or the behavior you're trying to stop, they got to go, because nobody is stronger than the girl in the purple sweater and the guy in the red shirt. When they walk up next to you and they say something, or they're just doing it in your life, it has a massive effect. I can tell you from 8 years with over 1,000 people at the Other Side Academy that if they go out and hook back up with the girlfriend they used to use with, they're done. They're done. And that's no different for you and me. The people we're around that lack faith or are working their way out of the church, if we start to adopt and be influenced in that direction, it will affect us too. This does not say we don't minister, but there's a difference between ministering and being influenced by. And that's the line we need to work on. So here's the irony, and please, please, please listen to this. You're going to hate it, but it's true. And I've got decades and decades of social science to back this up, and the scriptures as well. You ask yourself, which sources of influence is strongest in the average human being? Is it our core deep values, or is it social norms? The embarrassing truth is it's social norms. The social science will say it over and over and over again. And so you got to take control of the things that control you. The social reality you create for yourself will shape you. You don't get to vote. That's how it works. And that's the story here, right? So in the story of the tree of life in the Book of Mormon, that the principle here is those people up there that are pointing and mocking, they are going to shape your choices. They are going to affect you. And the only thing that finally worked was this. It says, and after they had partaken of the fruit of the tree, they'd cast their eyes about as if they were ashamed. And then Nephi wonders, why are they ashamed? And he says, and after they tasted the fruit, they were ashamed because of those that were scoffing at them. And they fell away into forbidden paths and were lost. You and I have adopted so many social norms today, not because the prophet said that those are the right thing to do, but because the world shapes us. And so the only principle that works is to not heed, to not look, to distance, to push the accomplices away and bring the friends closer. How does God influence us? Look at the scriptures. He sends Naomi to Ruth. He sends Mordecai to Esther. He sends Jethro to Moses. He sends Martin, Sidney, and Oliver, and others to Joseph. Joseph didn't do it by himself. He had people brought into his life that mentored and coached and taught him. So what about you? Who models the habits that you want to change? Who puts up with it that shouldn't? Who enables it? Who encourages or even celebrates it? Who expects it or even makes allowances for it? If you change who you're with, you'll change who you are. Hope you're getting the idea. Last couple, real quick here. So we're going to look at the non-human parts, right? The economy we operate in. Turns out incentives help. Would this app help us? Take a look at it. You had a little alarm that went off, and the only way you could shut that sucker off was to pay $1, right? Snoozing costs $1, and dismissing it is free, right? If I'm actually going to get up out of it. Could that make a difference? It's remarkable how these little changes make a difference. So there's a guy walking in a grocery store one day, pushing a cart with his son who is out of control, grabbing things off the shelf, screaming. Finally, he gets up to the checkout stand. And as he's standing at the checkout stand, the woman behind him overhears him reciting to himself, Billy, just 5 more minutes and you'll be at the car and you can have a treat. Billy, just 5 more minutes and you can be at the car and you'll be able to have your treat. Billy, 5 more minutes. You'll be at the car and you get to have your treat. Finally, the woman taps him on the shoulder and said, what a patient, wonderful father you are. Billy is so lucky to have such a wonderful dad. He says, oh no, that's not Billy. I'm Billy. Could that work? Could it work? There's a treat in the car if I do the right thing. It turns out that the problem with a lot of our habits is the cost of the bad habits doesn't motivate us to change because those costs are way out in the future. If I'm not taking good care of my health, those costs are way out away. But that Twinkie is right here, right now, right? And so that's why those costs don't motivate us to change. And so what you and I can do is take control of the things that control us. Use small, immediate rewards to reinforce things for ourselves. So a German study showed a really interesting thing, that people who are trying to get themselves to exercise more regularly, that a good way to helping them stick, in fact, 35% more stuck with their habit if they did one simple thing. So they got themselves to do that more often by doing that more often. What the study showed was those in the experimental condition who are just told after you finish your exercise routine, have a small little piece, not a big one, but a little piece of chocolate and eat it. So every time you finish, chocolate. Every time you finish, chocolate. Every time you finish, chocolate. And pretty soon as I'm getting close to the end of my workout, what am I doing? I'm salivating, right? I'm thinking about the chocolate. And it worked. It worked profoundly, giving yourselves a little chance to celebrate and a little reward that's appropriate, that encourages us. But you and I don't do that because we think if I were tough enough and committed enough, I wouldn't need to. Well, baloney. 100 years of social science says you're not bigger than these sources of influence. So use them in your favor, because they're already working against you. So how to reward yourself? Just use little goals and rewards, and they rewire the reward centers of your brain over time. Finally, last source of influence. Let's see if you can get this joke. Do you see the irony? Yeah. I have to admit, when I first saw this picture with embarrassment, I remembered how many times when I go to the gym, I fight for the closest parking place, right? To go stand on the treadmill afterwards. What am I doing? So our physical environment unconsciously shapes our behavior in ways we don't even realize. So we did a little experiment years ago in Las Vegas. Anyone been to Las Vegas before? So how do you cross Las Vegas Boulevard? There you go. Yeah, people are doing this. So if you've been to Las Vegas, you know you do not cross Las Vegas Boulevard. You go up an escalator, through a casino, cross a bridge, through another casino, down another escalator, and then you're across, right? They designed it that way on purpose. So we use these escalators to our advantage. Over the course of an hour, we wanted to count how many people would ascend using the escalator versus the stairs. So count with me, be my data analyst here. How many ascend the stairs? All right, how many did you get? Yeah, a couple? Okay, so hardly anybody takes the stairs. We wondered if a little tweak in the environment might help to change behavior. So we put at the bottom of the stairs this little sign. And we wondered, would it shape anybody's choices? Isn't that incredible? 17% of the people now take the escalator. Just because something prompted a thought, helped them reframe the moment, a little tweak in the environment makes an enormous difference. I had a problem with procrastinating for a long time. I'd have writing assignments I needed to do. I'd be traveling to New Jersey, getting to my hotel, feeling exhausted, thinking, I'll just watch television. And I'd procrastinate and not get my writing assignments done until I figured this out. If when I came in the room, I just took out a pad of paper, wrote down a list of the things I want to finish before I relax, and then took the remote control and locked it in the safe. Might sound silly, but literally that little intervention made me conscious of the moment, and it manipulated the environment just a bit. Here's some interesting data for you. This is kids' report cards based on where their cell phone is. If the cell phone is next to me, screen up, sound on, versus next to me, screen down, sound off, versus near me but out of sight, versus in my room, out of sight and reach, versus in another room. And this isn't just true of the kids, it's us, right? You start pushing these things away. The reason cell phones shape our behavior is because master manipulators design the apps. And so you got to take control of things that control you. You don't get to vote on whether or not you start feeling that anxious feeling when your phone buzzes. You're going to. That's how you're wired. The only thing you can do is to say, I'm going to put it away when I want to concentrate, when I want to focus. How does the Lord influence us? As you read the scriptures, I hope your eyes are open to how he uses all of these sources of influence. And it came to pass that the Lord commanded my father that he should take his family and leave. One of the most common interventions is helping us change our zip codes. Joseph, Mary, Lehi, Nephi, Mosiah, Moses, Jared, Mulek, Enoch, and many others. His intervention is to say, I'm going to put you in a completely different physical space. And you and I need to learn to do the same. He didn't do that because they were weak. He did that because they were human, and because that's how human beings respond. Satan knows this, and that's why he's made the bad stuff so accessible, so easy to find. He's made it easier and easier for us to do things that hurt our long-term prospects and give us something immediate. And so you and I need to start to be humble enough to say those things do control me. They do shape me. That's social science. It's not a moral indictment. You can only control your behavior by taking control of the things that control you. Make the bad stuff a little bit harder to do and the good stuff a little bit easier to do. So here's the data. After 35 years of research in this area, here's what we know. If you'll do that, and if you do that, and if you do that, and if you do that, if you just take control of the things that control you, the odds of change go up 1,000%. The odds of you acquiring and sticking with new habits go up tenfold. These aren't modest little shifts in behavior. This is the physics of human choice. God put us into a world where all 6 sources of influence were going to make good choices tough, because he wanted us not just to resist them, but to change the world. He wants us to create Zion. He wants us to reshape the planet. And Zion is a condition that addresses all of those sources of influence. Now, if you're a good social scientist, if you give me just 2 more minutes, you're probably saying, all right, Joseph, but what about the kids? What if you gave them no taste? What if you trained them a little bit on how to track their spending? What if you had the girl in the purple sweater and the guy in the red shirt?
How about you? I think I'm going to save my money. It'd probably be a good idea.
What if you paid him in cash, and what if you took down the pictures? Would it make a difference? It's the same candy, same impulses, same kids, same age. Everything's exactly the same. Could it make a difference? Well, it turned out the differences were immediately obvious. Now, the problem is you look at those kids and go, oh, they must just be stronger, right? They must be more determined, more goal-oriented. No, they aren't. They were randomly assigned to this condition. There was a little bit of spending that took place, but where the previous kids walked out with $13, these kids walked out with $34. These aren't small differences, brothers and sisters. This is how the world works. And our job is to be smarter about influencing the world. These percentages are enormous, and that's our job. Our job is to act and not be acted upon. I pray that this conversation illuminates the many opportunities we have to do that. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.